Taylor swallowed the humiliation day after day. In the hospital halls, Charles stripped her dignity in front of coworkers, questioned her competence, and reduced her to silence with cold authority. That morning, the pressure finally broke. When Charles humiliated her once again, Taylor's voice rose raw, shaking, desperate. For the first time, she defended herself. The room froze. Charles didn't hesitate. He fired her on the spot. Taylor tried to take it back, her words tumbling out as panic set in. She couldn't lose this job. Without it, everything would fall apart. But Charles was already done with her. Taylor walked out of the hospital carrying a cardboard box, her hands trembling, her future suddenly terrifyingly empty. Hours later, standing outside the same doors she had just been thrown out of, the sky shattered with the thunder of a helicopter. Wind ripped through the parking lot as it touched down. Then someone screamed, frantic and terrified, "Where is the nurse?" Taylor's breath caught. The aircraft bore the markings of the Navy SEALs. An admiral stepped out, his presence heavy, urgent. Charles was rushed outside, and the moment he understood why the SEALs were there, his confidence collapsed. His face went pale, his voice changed, and then, in a tone no one had ever heard from him before, he demanded that Taylor return immediately. What could make a powerful hospital administrator reverse everything in seconds? What did Taylor know that turned humiliation into absolute shock? But before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Now, let's understand how this story really began. The fluorescent lights of St. Jude's Hospital hummed with a constant, high-pitched vibration, the kind that burrowed into the skull and refused to leave. Taylor stood at the nurse's station, fingers resting on the cool laminate counter, her jaw locked just tightly enough to make the muscle in her cheek twitch. The tremor in her hands wasn't fear, it was restraint. 6 years. That was how long it had been since she'd needed to keep that part of herself buried. Her ID badge read registered nurse, clipped neatly to her scrubs. It didn't mention the years she'd spent as a combat corpsman, attached to DevGru, attaching men together under rotor wash and incoming fire, memorizing anatomy by touch in near darkness. Civilian hospitals had rules, protocols, ego. None of that had stopped a patient in room 300 from going into cardiac arrest 10 minutes earlier. The file hit the counter like a gunshot. Taylor didn't flinch, but her eyes lifted slowly. Charles Vinson stood across from her, immaculate in a tailored suit that had never known sweat. His silk tie was perfectly knotted, his hair immovable. He leaned forward just enough to invade her space, the sharp edge of his cologne cutting through the antiseptic air. "Incompetence," he said, tapping the folder with a manicured finger. Pure incompetence. Taylor's shoulders remained level. Her breathing stayed measured for in, for out. She'd learned that trick long before hospitals. "I told you the VIP suite linens were to be changed every hour," Charles continued, his voice rising just enough to draw glances from passing staff. "Do you lack the cognitive capacity to follow simple instructions?" Her gaze dropped, not in submission, but calculation. The overdue rent notice flashed through her mind, the pediatric copay, Leo's school lunch account dipping into the red. "I was stabilizing a patient in cardiac arrest," she said quietly. "Room 304. The linens had to wait." Charles smiled, thin and humorless. He leaned closer. She could see a faint vein pulsing at his temple. "I don't pay you to play doctor," he said. "I pay you to clean, smile, and stay invisible. If you can't handle the pressure of a real job, maybe you should crawl back to whatever hole you came from." Something shifted. It wasn't explosive, it was internal. A clean, precise fracture. Taylor's spine straightened, shoulders rolled back. Her chin lifted a fraction of an inch. The softness drained from her eyes, replaced by something flat and assessing ice where warmth had been. "I saved a man's life today," she said, her voice drop, lower, steadier. "While you were counting thread density, I was stopping a bleed out. So don't lecture me about pressure." The nurse's station went silent. Even the fluorescent buzz seemed louder in the absence of conversation. A nurse halfway down the hall froze, clipboard clutched to her chest. Charles blinked, once, twice. His authority had never been challenged like this, certainly not by someone in scrubs. "You're fired," he snapped, face flushing an ugly red. "Get out now, and I'll make sure no hospital in this city touches you." The adrenaline vanished as fast as it had come. Reality hit hard and heavy. Leo's face. The bills. The thin margin she'd been balancing on for months. Her shoulders sagged. Just slightly. "Mr. Vincent," she said, swallowing. "Please, I apologize. I need this job." He turned away, already waving a hand. "Security, escort her out." 10 minutes later, Taylor stood outside under a gray sky, rain soaking through her scrubs. The cardboard box in her arm sagged as water seeped into its seams. A framed photo of Leo blurred as droplets splashed against the glass. She didn't wipe her face. The tears mixed freely with the rain. Then the air changed. A low-frequency thump rolled through her chest, rattling windows and rippling puddles at her feet. Hump, hump, hump. Taylor's head lifted instinctively. The sound wasn't foreign. It was muscle memory. A shadow swallowed the parking lot as a matte black MH-60 Black Hawk bagged hard over the tree line. No markings, no medevac lights. Dust and debris exploded outward as it descended, security guards shielding their faces. The side door slid open before the skids even touched the asphalt. 2 operators jumped clear, weapons low, movements economical. Then a man in dress uniform stepped out, stars gleaming on his collar despite the chaos. Taylor didn't move. She stood there in the rain, box clutched to her chest. The Admiral scanned the crowd, eyes sharp, urgency carved into every step. He didn't look at the hospital staff. He didn't look at security. He shouted over the roar of the rotors, "Where is the nurse? Where is Taylor?" Charles Vincent burst through the automatic doors, one hand clamped awkwardly to his head as the rotor wash threatened to rip his toupee free. The wind flattened his suit against his body, stripping away the illusion of authority he carried inside the building. His polished shoes skidded slightly on the wet concrete as his eyes locked onto the insignia on the approaching officer's collar. Stars, not one, several. His pupils dilated. A senior flag officer. Military money. Political insulation. Donors with deep pockets and long memories. This was salvageable. It had to be. "Admiral!" Charles shouted, forcing his mouth into a wide, ingratiating smile as he hurried forward, arms open in welcome. "I'm Charles Vincent, hospital administrator. Whatever you need, we're prepared. I have my top surgeons on standby. Our trauma wing is fully." The Admiral didn't slow. He didn't acknowledge the voice, the outstretched hand, or the title. His stride was direct, purposeful, boots striking the asphalt with the certainty of someone used to command under fire. The impact came without warning. The Admiral's shoulder slammed into Charles's chest, a blunt, controlled collision. Charles staggered backward, air tearing from his lungs, and crashed into a line of metal shopping carts. The clatter echoed across the parking lot, swallowed only partially by the thunder of the rotors. Charles gasped, hands clawing at the cart handles, his face flushing as humiliation replaced confidence. The Admiral didn't look back. His gaze had locked onto a lone figure standing several yards away, unmoving in the rain. Taylor. She hadn't shifted since the helicopter's arrival. The cardboard box rested against her hip, rainwater darkening its edges. Her feet were shoulder-width apart, spine straight, chin level. Without conscious thought, her heels had a line, her shoulders square. Attention, the habit was buried deep, carved into muscle memory long before civilian life. She couldn't stop it any more than she could stop breathing. Inside the hospital, faces pressed against the windows. Nurses, orderlies, physicians drawn by instinct to the sudden rupture in normalcy. Mouths hung open, phones trembled in uncertain hands. The Admiral closed the distance between himself and Taylor in long, efficient strides. He stopped precisely 2 feet in front of her, close enough that the rotor wash snapped at the hem of his uniform coat. Rain streaked down Taylor's face. She didn't blink. Behind them, Charles shoved himself upright, fury shaking his frame. His right eye twitched uncontrollably as he pointed an accusing finger. "Officer," he screamed over the nose, "that woman is no longer employed here. She is a security risk. Ignore her." The Admiral turned. It was slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that warned of consequences. His eyes settled on Charles with surgical precision. No rage, no theatrics, just cold assessment. The look froze Charles mid-breath, his mouth still open, words dying in his throat. "One more word," the Admiral said, voice low but carrying effortlessly through the chaos. and I will have you detained for interfering with a Tier 1 national security operation." Charles swallowed, the finger lowered, his lips pressed together, blood draining from his face. The Admiral turned back to Taylor. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to contract to the space between them. The roar of the helicopter faded into background noise. Rain slid down the brim of the Admiral's cap. Then, with absolute precision, he snapped his hand up. The salute was flawless. Taylor's breath caught not from surprise, but from recognition. Respect like that was never given lightly. "Chief," the Admiral said, his voice fractured just enough to betray the weight behind the words. "We have a code black. Valkyrie protocols are active. We need you." The cardboard box slipped from Taylor's hands. It hit the ground and split at the corner, personal belongings spilling into shallow puddles. She didn't look down. She didn't hesitate. Her arm came up instantly, returning the salute, every angle exact despite 6 years of disuse. "Sitrop, Admiral," she asked. The nurse was gone. What remained was controlled focus. The Admiral stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Elias Thorne. Multiple shrapnel injuries. Hemodynamically unstable. He refused agency medical staff." Taylor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He said, the Admiral continued, that he only trusts the ghost who stitched him up in Fallujah. Her eyes widened a fraction, just enough. She glanced at the helicopter. Then back toward the hospital entrance, where Charles stood frozen, rain plastering his suit to his body as understanding dawned too late. Taylor's hand clenched once at her side. "Get me a trauma kit," she barked, already moving, pointing toward a paralyzed nurse watching from the doorway, "and get me on that bird." The interior of the Black Hawk was cramped and vibrating, the air thick with the layered stench of hydraulic fluid, burned insulation, sweat, and copper. Blood had a smell that never lied. Taylor registered it instantly. She swung into the cabin and dropped onto the wet seat, boots braced against the deck as the aircraft shuddered. Her hands moved on reflex, threading the restraint straps through the buckles, cinching them down with a practiced pull. No wasted motion, no hesitation. Across from her, the Admiral sat rigid, knees wide, one gloved hand gripping the edge of the bench as the rotors clawed them skyward. Between them lay Elias Thorne. The world knew him as a tech billionaire, a visionary philanthropist whose name adorned university wings and medical research grants. Taylor saw none of that. She saw Spectre. 15 years fell away in a blink. Sand, fire, the metallic shriek of shrapnel tearing through armor. She had dragged him from a burning Humvee by the collar, his blood slick on her gloves, his pulse a fading whisper under her fingers. Now his skin was the color of wet ash. Each breath came shallow and ragged, lips tinged blue. A jagged shard of metal jutted from his lower chest, rising and falling with every labored inhale. "Taylor," Elias rasped. His hand shot out and closed around her wrist with surprising force, tendons standing out beneath paper-thin skin. "Don't let the suits kill me." Her grip tightened around his fingers, just enough to anchor him. "Save your breath, Spectre," she said, already working. Her fingers slid to his carotid, counting beats, eyes flicking to the portable monitor. "Blood pressure's 80/50. You're hypovolemic." The helicopter pitched hard as it banked, engines roaring. Taylor barely noticed. The Black Hawk climbed and then angled sharply back toward the hospital, its nose pointed for the rooftop helipad, the one Charles Vincent had shut down months ago over nose complaints and donor irritation. Below them, the city blurred. On the roof, Charles Vincent burst through the access door, lungs burning, suit jacket soaked through with sweat and rain. His hand clutched uselessly at his tie as he staggered forward, followed by Dr. Reese, the chief of surgery, whose expression shifted rapidly from confusion to alarm as he took in the aircraft descending toward them. The skids hit concrete with a bone-jarring thud. Taylor was out before the rotors fully slowed, unhooking herself mid-motion and guiding the stretcher toward the door. The Admiral moved in step beside her, presence tight and controlled. Charles planted himself directly in front of the stretcher, arms spread wide, panic flashing across his face. "Now listen here," he shouted, voice cracking. "You cannot bring a patient in this way. There are insurance protocols, liability exposure, and she," his finger jabbed toward Taylor, trembling, "is trespassing." Taylor didn't slow. She met his eyes as she walked straight at him, the stretcher rolling relentlessly forward. Her voice was low, even. "Move," she said, "or I will move you." Charles's breath hitched, his mouth opened, closed. "I'm calling the police," he shrieked, backing half a step, then stopping himself. Taylor didn't look at him again. "Dr. Aris," she called, already pivoting toward the chief surgeon. "Patient presents with pericardial tamponade secondary to shrapnel. I need O negative, a thoracotomy tray, and the hybrid OR. Now." Dr. Aris hesitated only a fraction of a second. His gaze dropped to the patient's distended neck veins, the ashen skin, the protruding metal. Then he looked at Taylor's eyes, steady, unblinking, already 10 steps ahead. "Room 1 is open," he said. "Let's move." "No." Charles lunged forward and grabbed the side rail of the stretcher. "I forbid this. She is fired." The stretcher stopped. The Admiral stepped forward. His movement was calm, deliberate. He drew his sidearm smoothly from its holster, keeping it pointed toward the ground at a low ready position. The message was unmistakable. "Mr. Vincent," he said evenly, "by the authority of the Department of Defense, this hospital is now under temporary military command." Charles's hand slid off the stretcher. "You are relieved." The hybrid operating room erupted into motion the moment the door sealed. Stainless steel trays clattered into place. Blue drapes snapped open. Gloved hands moved with rehearsed urgency, but beneath the choreography something was off. The scrub nurses kept glancing at Dr. Aris. Dr. Aris kept watching Taylor. The patient lay motionless beneath the lights, chest rising unevenly as the ventilator fought to keep pace. The shard of metal protruding from his torso glinted weightly, each heartbeat threatening catastrophe. Dr. Aris leaned over the ultrasound, brow furrowing as he adjusted the probe. The image jittered on the screen. His jaw tightened. "The shrapnel is within millimeters of the aorta," he said, voice controlled but strained. "If we pull it blind, we risk catastrophic hemorrhage. We need a vascular specialist, best in the city." Taylor was already scrubbing in. Antiseptic solution streamed down her forearms as she rotated methodically, fingers interlaced, nails angled down. She didn't look up when she spoke. "We don't have time," she said. "He is maybe 3 minutes before pericardial pressure compromises cardiac output." She dried her hands, snapped on sterile gloves with a sharp flick of her wrists. "I've done this in a sandstorm with a flashlight and indirect fire. I can do it here." Dr. Aris hesitated. A single swallow bobbed his throat. He glanced at the monitor, at the distended veins in Elias's neck, at the numbers bleeding downward. Above them, behind the reinforced glass of the observation gallery, Charles Vincent paced in tight circles. His phone was pressed hard to his ear, knuckles whitening as he gestured wildly with his free hand. "She's cutting him open," he hissed. "A fired nurse, operating on a billionaire. This is gross negligence. Do you understand the exposure? We're talking criminal liability." His left eye twitched uncontrollably. Below, Taylor paused. She lifted her gaze just long enough to meet Charles's eyes through the glass. Her expression didn't change. No anger, no triumph, just focus. "Nurse," she said calmly, turning back to the field. "Kill the gallery audio. I don't need the nose." The assistant hesitated, fingers hovering over the control panel. "But he's the administrator." Taylor's head turned slightly. "Just enough, not today," she said. "Scalpel." The instrument landed in her palm. She adjusted her grip, blade angled with surgical precision. The incision was clean and decisive. Blood surfaced immediately, dark and sluggish, pooling faster than it should. "Suction," Taylor said. The tube appeared instantly, drawing the blood away in a steady hiss. "Retractor." Metal spread flesh, the cavity opened. Her hands were unshaking, movements economical. She navigated anatomy by instinct and experience, fingers reading tissue the way others read monitors. This wasn't theory. This was memory, years of field trauma, of bodies torn by blast and shrapnel, of decisions made without consultation or backup. Dr. Aris watched, silent now. His role had shifted without ceremony. The monitor screamed, "Beep, beep, beep, beep." The rhythm broke into chaos. "Ventricular fibrillation," Dr. Aris said sharply. "We're losing him." Taylor's jaw set. Her left hand never stopped working. "Tattles," she said. "Charge to 200. The defibrillator whined as it charged. Pitch rising, outside. Thunder cracked. The hospital lights flickered. momentarily dimming, then stabilizing. Clear, the shock hit. Elias's body jerked violently against the table, restraints straining. The line on the monitor flattened, merciless and unforgiving. Silence pressed down on the room, broken only by the mechanical hiss of oxygen. Taylor didn't step back. She exhaled slowly through her nose, eyes never leaving the exposed chest. "Again," she said quietly. "Charge to 300, Taylor said, her voice cutting cleanly through the alarms. The defibrillator's pitch climbed. A thin vibration ran through the paddles as stored energy reached lethal potential. Clear, the shock ripped through Elias's body. His shoulders jerked against the restraints, jaw snapping shut with a hollow crack. The monitor answered with nothing, a flat, merciless line. Taylor exhaled once through her nose, no wasted movement. She dropped the paddles onto the tray, where they clattered uselessly. "Epinephrine," she said. Louder now, 1 milligram, for Poch. The syringe appeared in her peripheral vision. She nodded once and plunged both hands back into the open chest cavity, fingers spreading, finding the heart by feel. It was slack beneath her palms, unresponsive, a heavy thing that refused to obey. She began internal cardiac massage, her forearms flexed rhythmically, muscles tightening beneath the surgical gown as she compressed and released, manually forcing circulation. Blood slicked her gloves, worn man sticky. "Come on, Elias," she muttered through clenched teeth. "You didn't survive Afghanistan to die in a climate-controlled room." The rhythm continued, compress, release, compress. Above them, behind the glass, Charles Vincent leaned forward. His mouth curled upward. It wasn't relief, it wasn't nerves. It was calculation. A small, cruel smile tugged at one corner of his lips as his eye twitched again. Faster now. If the billionaire died on that table, the narrative flipped: a fired nurse, unauthorized surgery. Gross negligence, manslaughter, everything ended here for her. He folded his arms slowly, savoring it. Below, Dr. Aris checked the clock mounted above the monitors. His fingers hovered, uncertain, then lowered. "Time without effective cardiac output is approaching the limit," he said quietly. "We're nearing time of death." Taylor didn't look up. "No," she growled. Her fingers paused, not the compressions, but the pressure. She felt it then, something wrong. Not electrical, not structural. Her hand shifted slightly behind the heart, fluid, not blood. Too thin, too uniform. Her jaw tightened. "This isn't primary cardiac," she said. "The arrhythmia is secondary." She looked toward the corner of the room. The Admiral stood there, scrubbed, silent, posture rigid. His hands were clasped behind his back, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. "Admiral," Taylor said, "was the shrapnel chemically treated?" For a fraction of a second, he didn't answer, then his face drained of color. "Intel indicated possible agent exposure," he said. "Organophosphate-based neurotoxin." Taylor's breath hitched once, just once. "Then this isn't tamponade killing him," she snapped. "It's paralysis." She raised her voice. "Atropine, pralidoxime." Now, the room froze. Dr. Aris stared at her, disbelief flickering across his face. "Those are military antidotes," he said. "We don't stock nerve agent countermeasures in a civilian operating room." Above them, Charles lunged toward the console and slammed the intercom button he had overridden earlier. "Exactly," his voice blasted into the OR. "She's speculating. This is insanity. Call it, doctor. Declare time of death." Taylor's eyes lifted slowly to the glass. Her stare was steady, unblinking. Then she scanned the room, cataloging in a single breath. Crash cart, supply cabinets, emergency signage. She turned back to Dr. Aris. "The pharmacy has a level for emergency cash," she said. "Terror response stockpile. Basement, secured locker." Dr. Aris swallowed. "The access code is restricted to administration," Taylor finished. Her gaze returned to the observation gallery. "Charles," she said, voice dangerously calm, "give us the code." Charles straightened, folding his arms tighter across his chest. The smile returned, thin and mean. "I don't know what fantasy you're operating under," he said into the microphone, "but I am not authorizing the release of controlled substances based on the intuition of a terminated employee." Below the glass, Elias's heart went slack. It stopped responding to Taylor's hands. She felt it. Her fingers tightened reflexively, compressing again, harder now, forcing blood through a moving muscle. Nothing. The monitor remained silent. The Admiral's jaw tightened as the monitor screened its flat, merciless line. His fingers flexed once, involuntarily, brushing the grip of his sidearm as if muscle memory alone might solve what medicine could not. His eyes never left the body on the table. "He's killing him," the Admiral said. The words were controlled, but a faint tremor slipped through, betraying the violence of the thought behind them. Taylor didn't look up. Her hands were locked over Elias's chest, palms stacked, shoulders aligned, elbows rigid. Each compression drove her body weight down with surgical precision, the cadence exact 100 to 120 per minute. Her breathing was clipped, measured, timed between compressions. Sweat traced a straight line from her hairline down the bridge of her nose, dripping onto the sterile drape. "Admiral," she said. Her voice dropped low, stripped of rank, stripped of negotiation. "Go to the pharmacy, blow the door." Dr. Reese stiffened. A crease formed between his brows, deepening as he calculated consequences faster than words. "That's a felony," he said, his tone clinical but tight. His thumb rubbed unconsciously against his index finger, a tell he only showed when protocols were collapsing. "I am the law right now," the Admiral replied. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't argue. He pivoted on his heel and moved, coat flaring once before settling back into stillness, like a door closing on hesitation. Time fractured, seconds stretched thin, elastic, snapping back with every compression. Taylor's forearms began to tremble, muscles quivering under lactic burn. She adjusted her stance, without breaking rhythm, boots squeaking faintly against the OR floor, her jaw clenched. A small muscle ticked beneath her left eye. Dr. Reese glanced at the wall clock, then at the monitor, then back at her hands. "He's been down 6 minutes," he said quietly, his voice softened on her name. "Taylor. Even if he wakes up, the hypoxic injury, he's in there," she said, cutting him off. Her eyes never left Elias's face. His skin had taken on a gray-blue pallor, lips slack, lashes motionless. She leaned closer between compressions, as if proximity alone might tether him. "I know him." Somewhere far below, the building convulsed. The explosion punched through the hospital's spine, a concussive boom that rattled lights, sent dust drifting from ceiling tiles, and echoed up the stairwells like distant artillery. Instruments clinked, a nurse flinched, hands flying instinctively to the tray before she caught herself. In the observation gallery, Charles lurched to his feet, color draining from his face. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "They're destroying my hospital," he shouted, voice cracking as his knuckles went white against the railing. 2 minutes later, the OR door slammed open. The Admiral strode in, breath steady, eyes cold, carrying a sealed metal case marked with red warning text. A smear of soot streaked his sleeve. He didn't look at it. He crossed the room in 3 long steps and hurled the case toward the table. Taylor caught it without breaking compressions, fingers slick with blood and sweat. She cracked the seal with a sharp twist, glass vials rattling inside. Her hands moved on instinct: needle, syringe, draw, purge air. She shifted her weight, drove one final compression, then plunged the needle deep into Elias's thigh, straight through fabric into muscle. "Come on," she whispered. It wasn't a plea, it was an order. 10 seconds passed. The monitor remained silent, accusing. 20 seconds, still nothing. Charles leaned toward the microphone in the gallery, lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Well," he said, savoring each word, "that was a valiant, illegal effort. Security's on their way up to arrest you both." Then a sound, soft, wet, indisputable, thump-thump. Taylor froze for half a heartbeat, eye snapping to the monitor as the line jolted upward. A jagged green peak tore across the screen. Thump-thump, thump-thump. The room exhaled as one, a collective release of breath that trembled on the edge of disbelief. Taylor's shoulders sagged an inch, just enough to reveal the strain she'd been holding back. Her hand rested on Elias's chest, feeling it warm, real, alive. The heart was beating. Stabilization consumed the next 2 hours, a haze of measured movements and controlled urgency. The OR settled into a low, focused rhythm, ventilator cycling, suction humming, instruments passing hand to hand without words. Taylor worked with an economy that bordered on reverence. Her shoulders remained squared despite the tremor creeping into her triceps. When she located the shrapnel, her fingers adjusted by millimeters, rotating the forceps just enough to avoid further vascular damage. The fragment came free with a soft metallic click against the tray. No wasted motion followed. Hemostasis, irrigation, closure. Dr. Reese watched from the opposite side of the table, his mouth slightly open, one gloved hand frozen mid-air before he realized it and lowered it. A surgeon twice her age nodded once, slowly, as if recalibrating an assumption he hadn't known he was carrying. When Taylor finally stepped back, peeling the blood-soaked gloves from her hands, the adhesive snap echoed louder than it should have. Her chest rose deeply once, then again, as if her lungs were remembering their full capacity. She exited the OR into the recovery hallway, the smell of antiseptic replacing cauterized flesh. Her gait faltered for half a step before she corrected it. At the far end of the corridor stood Charles, flanked by 3 uniformed police officers and the hospital's legal counsel. Charles's posture was rigid, chin lifted to high, jaw clenched tight enough to show the tendons in his neck. "That's her," he said, stabbing a finger in Taylor's direction. "Arrest her for practicing medicine without a license, trespassing, and destruction of property." One of the officers stepped forward. He slowed as he took in the SEALs still guarding the OR doors, their stance casual but unmistakably deliberate. His brow furrowed. "Ma'am," he began, uncertainty bleeding into his tone. Before Taylor could answer, the doors behind her opened. The Admiral stepped into the hallway. He was no longer in scrubs, he wore full dress uniform, pressed sharp enough to cut. The ribbons on his chest caught the fluorescent light. His posture locked the room into silence. "Officers," he said. His voice carried, resonant and absolute. "Step down." Charles spun toward him. "She's a nurse," he shouted, the words cracking at the edges. "A fired nurse." "She?" The Admiral interrupted, crossing the distance until he stood shoulder to shoulder with Taylor. "Is retired Chief Petty Officer Taylor Vance, Calcine Wraith, Navy Cross recipient, and the only reason the man inside who happens to own the holding company that owns this hospital is alive." Charles blinked, once, twice, his lips parted, but no sound came. "What?" he finally managed. "That's impossible. She changes bedpans." The Admiral's eyes hardened. "She changes bedpans because she chose a quiet life for her son," he said. "She stepped away from the teams to raise a family. But make no mistake, she is a Tier 1 asset. And you just attempted to have her arrested for preserving a national asset." The police officers exchanged glances. One shifted his weight back. Another took an unconscious step away from Charles. The first officer reached up and tipped his hat toward Taylor, a small, precise gesture. "I don't care about her medals," Charles snapped, his voice pitching higher as control slipped through his fingers. "She broke protocol. I'll have her license revoked." "Protocol?" A weak voice rasped from behind them. Every head turned. Elias Thorne was being wheeled down the hallway, fur lines swaying gently with the motion. His skin was pale, eyes heavy-lidded, but open. His gaze found Charles and held. One corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite contempt. "Protocol," Elias repeated, voice thin but steady, "is why I'm alive." The gurney rolled to a stop. Silence settled again, heavier this time. Taylor's jaw tightened, a single muscle jumping beneath her cheekbone as she watched him breathe on his own. Elias's breathing hitched as Taylor moved to his side, her hand hovering near his shoulder without touching, as if contact alone might steal the fragile equilibrium holding him together. "Elias, you shouldn't be speaking," she said quietly. Not a reprimand, an assessment. He didn't look at her. His eyes stayed locked on Charles, pupils tight, jaw working as if each word had to be pulled through resistance. "You? Vincent, right?" Charles straightened instantly, panic snapping into polished subservience. His shoulders rounded forward, hands opening in a placating gesture. "Mr. Thorne, thank God you're conscious. We were all very concerned. I personally ensured you received the highest standard of care, despite the interruptions." "Interruptions," Elias repeated, a dry rasp scraping his throat. He swallowed hard, Adam's apple jerking. "I heard everything, the intercom. It was still on." The color drained from Charles's face in a visible wave, starting at his temples and sinking downward. His lips parted, then pressed together again, as if his mouth no longer trusted itself. "But that's not the worst part," Elias continued. His eyelids fluttered once, then steadied. He shifted his gaze to Taylor. "My security team analyzed hospital records. While I was under," Taylor frowned slightly, the crease between her brows deepening. "What records?" The Admiral stepped forward, already holding out a tablet. Its screen glowed stark against the sterile hallway light. "While you were scrubbing in, our cyber warfare specialists conducted a defensive sweep of the hospital servers. Standard counterintelligence procedure when a national asset is compromised. They found anomalies tied to the administrator's credentials." Taylor took the tablet. Her thumb hesitated for a fraction of a second before scrolling. Rows of numbers filled the screen: budgets, payroll allocations, staffing models. Patterns emerged quickly to someone trained to see them. Her jaw tightened. A slow exhale left her nose. It was elegant in its cruelty. Reduced nurse-to-patient ratios justified by operational efficiency. Overtime requests deny, then quietly billed anyway. Ghost hours rerouted. The difference siphoned into layered shell accounts, 5 years deep, all traced back to Charles's admin access. "That's why," Taylor said softly, lifting her eyes to him. "You were obsessed with efficiency." Charles shook his head too fast. "This is fabricated. Military intimidation. You can't. You fired me," Taylor went on, her voice even, controlled, "for requesting additional staff and trauma supplies, because the money allocated for those resources is already sitting in your offshore accounts." Her fist closed slowly at her side, knuckles whitening, then relaxed again. Discipline reasserted itself. Charles took a step backward, then another. His heel clipped the edge of a rolling cart, metal rattling sharply. One of the police officers shifted, blocking the corridor without fully committing, hand resting near his belt. "This hospital," Elias said, each word measured despite the strain, "denied care, overworked its staff, and endangered lives so you could skim margins. Including mine." Charles's eyes darted toward the exit. "I want a lawyer," he said. "Voice thin now, this is unlawful detention." The Admiral didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You already have one," he said, nodding toward the hospital counsel, whose gaze had dropped to the floor. "And you're no longer in a position to make demands." Security moved in, quiet and decisive. Charles's shoulders sagged as cuffs closed around his wrists, the click echoing down the hallway. Taylor watched without satisfaction, only a steady, unreadable calm. Elias's hand shifted weakly, brushing her sleeve. She looked down at him. "Thank you," he murmured. Not just for his life, for the truth. She inclined her head once. Elias's fingers twitched against the thin blanket as the gurney slowed. His chest rose shallowly, each breath measured, as if his body were still negotiating the terms of survival. "Officer," he whispered. The police officer who had arrived with intent to arrest Taylor stepped forward. His posture was careful now, boots planted shoulder-width apart, hands relaxed but ready. "Yes, Mr. Thorne." Elias swallowed. The movement pulled a faint grimace across his face, a reminder that every word still carried a cost. "I am pressing charges." Charles let out a short, sharp laugh that cracked halfway through. "This is absurd. Embezzlement," Elias continued, eyes never leaving him. "Reckless endangerment, and," he paused, breath hitching, then steadied. "Attempted murder." The hallway seemed to contract. Charles's mouth fell open, the sound that escaped him thin and involuntary. "Murder?" "You refused," Elias said, voice hoarse but unyielding, "to provide the access code for the antidote. You knew a neurotoxin was involved. You chose procedure over a life." His gaze hardened. "You wanted me to die so your paper trail would stay buried." The officer glanced at his partner, a nod. The decision moved through them without ceremony. Steel cuffs closed around Charles's wrists. The click was precise, final. Taylor felt it in her chest more than her ears, a clean, unmistakable sound. Her shoulders lowered by a fraction she hadn't noticed were raised. Charles lunged forward instinctively, then recoiled as security tightened in their grip. "You can't do this," he shouted, spittle catching at the corners of his mouth. "I'll sue everyone in this building." As they dragged him down the corridor, his shoes scuffed uselessly against the polished floor. He twisted once more, catching sight of Taylor. His face contorted, eyes blazing with a hatred stripped of calculation. "You're nothing," he screamed. "You're just a grunt." Taylor didn't react at first, her breathing remained slow, controlled. Then she stepped closer, closing the distance until the officers hesitated, unsure whether to intervene. She leaned in, her voice barely more than air against his ear. "I'm the grunt," she said quietly, "who just ended you." For a moment, he didn't seem to understand. Then his eyes widened, not in fear, but in realization, the kind that comes too late. The elevator door slid shut, cutting off his screams mid-syllable. The hum of the machinery swallowed the rest. Silence returned to the hallway. Elias's hand shifted again, searching. Taylor took it without looking down, her grip firm, anchoring. His skin was cool, pulse faint but steady beneath her fingers. "Mission accomplished, Wraith," he murmured, the corner of his mouth lifting with effort. Taylor exhaled through her nose. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, not triumph, just relief edged with exhaustion. "Not yet," she said. "I still have to pick up my son from school." Elias's eyes closed briefly, a breath escaping him that sounded almost like a laugh. The Admiral watched them from a few steps back, arms folded, expression unreadable. Outside, the storm finally began to fade, rain softening against the windows as the hospital resumed its rhythm. Taylor released Elias's hand and straightened, already transitioning back into motion, back into life. 2 weeks later, the morning light washed St. Jude's Hospital in a clean, unforgiving clarity. Glass reflected blue sky instead of rain. The revolving doors turned, steady and quiet, as Taylor Van stepped inside. She wasn't wearing scrubs. The tailored blazer sat clean across her shoulders, structured without excess. Her posture hadn't changed, back straight, chin level, but the absence of a badge clipped to her collar felt deliberate, transitional. Her shoes made a muted, confident sound against the polished floor as she crossed the lobby. The reception desk noticed her immediately. Conversations tapered off, spines straightened. Not out of fear, out of respect. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," the head nurse said, standing without thinking to do otherwise. The woman's hands were folded neatly in front of her, knuckles relaxed, eyes clear. "Good morning, Sarah," Taylor replied, already scanning the room on instinct. Exits, lines of sight, faces. "How's the linen supply?" "Fully stocked," Sarah answered, a brief smile pulling at one corner of her mouth. "And the new overtime pay schedule was approved yesterday." Taylor nodded once, a small motion. It carried weight. She moved toward the elevators. Staff along the corridor offered quiet greetings, not rehearsed, not forced. A respiratory tech paused mid-step to let her pass. A resident lowered his voice out of habit. The building felt different, like a place that could finally breathe. The elevator door slid open on the top floor, the administrator's office. She stepped inside. The change was immediate. The walls were bare of garish art. The air smelled neutral, no cloying cologne clinging to power. Sunlight fell across clean surfaces, intentional lines, a desk cleared down to function. At its center sat a framed photograph. Leo, her son's grin was wide, unguarded, a gap-toothed smile caught mid-laugh. Taylor's fingers brushed the frame as she passed, the contact brief, grounding. Beside it lay a contract, signed and countersigned. No ceremony, just ink. Elias Thorne hadn't merely terminated Charles Vincent, he had restructured authority, consolidated oversight, installed accountability. He had appointed Taylor Vance as director of operations. She sat in the leather chair, testing its bounds, then turned it slowly toward the window. The city stretched outward, streets, traffic, lights intersecting below. Her jaw tightened for a moment, then eased. A breath she hadn't realized she was holding slipped free. Her phone vibrated once on the desk. Deposit received. $500,000. Signing bonus. She didn't smile. Not yet. The number registered. Filed away. Stripped of emotion. Money was a tool. Security. Options. Survival had been replaced by margin. Taylor rotated back toward the desk, picked up the pen, and removed the cap with a practiced motion. Her grip was steady, purposeful. She began to review operational reports, staffing ratios, supply chain redundancies, emergency response drills. Where others saw spreadsheets, she saw vulnerabilities, points of failure, places where people got hurt when leadership looked away. Not anymore. She wasn't a SEAL now, and she wasn't just a nurse. She was the shield between this building and chaos, between her people and the kind of negligence that killed quietly. Outside, the city moved on, unaware. Inside, Taylor Vance leaned forward, pen moving, already on her next mission. If you want to see more stories like this, quiet strength, earn justice, and professionals to never quit, subscribe to the channel and stay with us.